In the spring of 1990, I had a job changing the letters on a movie theater marquee. I was a teenager back then. Every week I climbed up with a long pole and a box of black plastic letters, and I spelled out whatever movie was opening that week. I worked at that theater for about 2 years. I put up movie titles you'd recognize instantly, and I put up movie titles you've never heard of before. Standing on the ladder at the time, I couldn't have told you which one of those two movies each would become. One of the titles I put up was a movie called Robot Jox. If you don't remember Robot Jox, you didn't miss much, but that's not specifically what this episode is about. Robot Jox came out around 1990. It was a science fiction movie about giant piloted war machines that fight each other to settle disputes between nations. Because in the world of the film, humanity has outlawed war and replaced it with these televised robot duels. It cost around $10 million to make, which was a pretty serious budget at the time. It had a decent director, it had a marketing campaign, and then the prints went back into their shipping cans. The cans went back to the distributor, and as far as the wider culture is concerned, the movie quietly ceased to exist. Down the same hallway, in another auditorium of the same building, across those same 2 years, I also put up titles like Goodfellas and Silence of the Lambs and Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. Those movies didn't disappear. They went into our canon. We quote them, at least I do. We rank them. 35 years later, people who weren't alive when I was up on that ladder can still tell you about Hannibal Lecter, and they can describe the long tracking shot through the nightclub in Goodfellas. Here's what I didn't understand when I was 16 with a pole in my hand and a box of letters at my feet. On the nights I was working, every one of those movies was just a movie. They were all prints in a metal can. They weighed about the same. They smelled like the same warm plastic and projector heat, a smell I deeply remember. Robot Jox and The Silence of the Lambs both played in the same booth, in the same building, in the same calendar year, and nothing about holding those films told me that one would last forever and one would vanish without a trace. Something decided which was which, and it wasn't only the movies that did that deciding. I'm Lorne Bregitzer, a professor at the University of Colorado Denver's College of Arts and Media, and on Everything is Gray, we try to make sense of something that's rarely simple, how the artists we admire and the things they've done shape the way we see their work and ourselves. Most weeks on this show, the thing standing between you and the truth has a name and an address, a studio, a record label, a publisher, an estate, or a prosecutor with bigger ambitions than scruples. Somebody made a decision in a room that protected an organization and cost a person something real. This week is lighter, and the villain is a lot closer to home. There's no studio to subpoena this time, no executive to name. The thing editing this story this week is your own memory, and has been doing the job quietly on your behalf for your entire adult life. It does it well, and it does it consistently. It has never once asked for your permission. This is an episode about nostalgia, about why the movies, the music, and the books you love between roughly 15 and 25 years old feel permanently, unarguably better than anything that came out after. About whether they really were better, or whether your own brain has been cooking the books for decades and never once shown you the receipts. And because this is Everything is Gray, it's also about the second thing that's going on at the same time. Your brain isn't only lying to you, it's also doing something for you that you would not, if you fully understood it, ever agree to give up. Here's a claim that sounds like an opinion but behaves like a law of nature. Ask almost any adult when the best music was made, and they'll name a window that lines up suspiciously well with their own teens and early 20s. Ask them about movies and you'll get the same answer. Ask about TV shows, same answer. The specific years move depending on who you're talking to, but the shape of the answer never changes. The best stuff came out when I was young. It's such a reliable answer that you can almost set your watch by it. Give it 20 years and today's teenagers, the ones currently being told by their parents that real music is over, will be saying the same thing about whatever they're listening to right now, to their own kids, who'll just roll their eyes just like mine do. The complaint is older than recorded music, and it will outlive all of us. I'm no exception, and I should put my own evidence on the table before I start poking holes in everyone else's. I was in high school in the early 90s. When I was there, Nirvana, Pearl Jam, the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and Metallica all detonated more or less at once. It felt like the ground moving, and here's the part that makes the feeling so convincing. 3 decades later, those bands are still selling out arenas and stadiums. Pearl Jam can fill a baseball park. Metallica headlines festivals for crowds who weren't even born when I was buying their CDs. So when I tell you the music of my youth was special, I can point at a sold-out stadium and say, see, I'm not just being sentimental, the market agrees with me. But notice the trick hiding in that argument. I'm pointing at the bands that lasted. I'm not mentioning the dozens of bands I loved just as much in 1992 that you've never heard of because they're gone. Their survivors feel like proof that the era was great. They're actually proof that some things survive and most things don't, which is a completely different claim. So let me ask the version of the question that I can't answer with a stadium. Which artists working right now will be selling out those same stadiums in 2055? I have no idea, and neither do you. And the honest, slightly uncomfortable truth is that nobody buying records in 1991 knew it either. They got lucky in retrospect about which of their favorites would turn out to be permanent. Now here's the wrinkle that complicates my own thesis, and I want to be fair to it. As a college professor, I spend my working life around people in their late teens and early 20s. And today's students on the whole are far more open to old culture than I was at their age. When I was 20, I had almost no interest in a movie that was already 30 years old. It felt like history. My students move through decades of music and film without much friction. They'll put a 1975 album next to something released last week and treat both as perfect options. Some of the best new music I've found in the last few years, I found it because a 19-year-old student of mine told me to check it out. And yet I still catch myself doing it. A student will hand me something brand new, something genuinely good, and my first instinct, before I've really listened to it, is a small involuntary flinch. A little voice that says, it's fine, but it's not like what we had. I have to consciously override that voice. And the fact that I, a person who studies this for a living and is about to spend a few minutes telling you about the voice is a liar, still have to fight it. Tells you how deep the wiring goes. So the reflex isn't even uniform. The internet has scrambled it, which makes the underlying feeling, the one that says my era was the peak, even more interesting, because it's strong enough to survive in most of us anyway. And a feeling that strong, that common, and that consistent across generations usually isn't coming from the art. It's coming from the equipment we use to experience the art. So let's open up that equipment. There's a finding in psychology so sturdy that researchers treat it as a fixed feature of the human mind. It's called the Reminiscence Bump. In 1986, 3 researchers, David Rubin, Scott Welzer, and Ronald Niebes, looked at what happens when you ask older adults to recall events of their own lives. You'd expect recent events to dominate, since they're the freshest. But they don't. When people over 40 list their autobiographical memories, a wildly disproportionate share cluster in a single window, roughly ages 10 to 30. Childhood is thin, middle age is thin, but the teens and 20s light up far brighter than any other stretch of life. That spike is a reminiscence bump, and it's been replicated for decades across cultures and methods. Now bring it to music specifically, which is where this gets personal for all of us. A recent global study led by Ibaya Buranat at the University of Jyväskylä in Finland, published in the journal Memory, asked nearly 2,000 people across 84 countries to name a piece of music that held a deeply personal meaning for them. The songs they named clustered around one age, 17 years old. Not the music that's objectively more complex, not the music that's won the most awards, the music that happened to be playing when they were about 17 years old. There was a gender split worth mentioning. On average, men's most meaningful music locked in a little earlier, around 16, and women settle a little bit later, in their early 20s, and shifted around more across their lives. But the bump itself showed up everywhere. Buranat described the adolescent brain as a sponge, supercharged by curiosity, primed to absorb. The study also turned up something the researchers called a cascading reminiscence bump. Younger listeners forming deep attachments to music made before they were born, handed down by parents and older siblings, and the artists who refused to fade. Which, by the way, is exactly what I see in my students, and in my own kids. Last year they wanted to go see David Byrne and Paul McCartney and 9 Inch Nails, so of course I took them. Kelly Jakubowski, a researcher at Durham University, put the mechanism plainly in her own work. The years of the bump are crowded with experiences that are both novel and self-defining, and the brain encodes those more deeply and lets you retrieve them more easily. Your first time hearing a song that felt like it was written about your exact life. Your first concert. The album that got you through the worst year of high school. The brain follows those with a priority flag that a perfectly good song you hear at age 52 simply doesn't get. I can test this on myself in about 4 seconds. There are a handful of songs where the opening 2 notes drop me instantly and completely back into a specific car, a specific person, a specific feeling I had at 17 and have never quite had since. It isn't that I'm thinking about that time. I'm there briefly before I've decided anything. No song I've encountered in the last 15 years does that to me, no matter how much I admire it. The door only opens onto the years when the door was being built. It helps to know what the adolescent brain is actually doing during those years, because it isn't the same software it runs at age 50. The teenage brain is flooded with dopamine and tuned for novelty. New experiences feel enormous emotionally in a way they rarely will again. The brain is still highly plastic, still wiring itself, still deciding which connections to keep, so an experience that arrives at 17 doesn't just get recorded, it gets recorded with the volume turned all the way up, by a brain that's primed to treat it as important and built to hold on to it. The same concert at age 45 lands on a system that's gentler, more settled, and a great deal more skeptical. It's not that you stopped being able to love new music, it's that the recording equipment got worse, in one specific way that really matters. And underneath all of it is identity. Dan McAdams, a psychologist at Northwestern, has spent his career on the idea that your identity is, in essence, an internalized story you tell about your own life. The Reminiscence Bump sits right on top of the years when you were writing your first real draft of that story. The years you figured out who you were and who you loved and what you believed and what you were going to do. The music and the movies in those years didn't just keep you company, they got welded to the story of your own becoming. You can't pry the song loose from the summer or the movie loose from the friend you saw it with, because in your memory they were never separate things. This is why the arguments about whether your favorite band is objectively good never go anywhere. You're not actually arguing about the band, you're defending a piece of your own identity. The version of you that was formed when that music was playing. An attack on the album feels like an attack on you, because in a real neurological sense, the two got stored in the same place. That's also why these conversations get so heated, and why nobody ever wins them. Here's the uncomfortable payoff. When you say the music was better back then, you may be reporting something completely true, but not about the music. You're reporting that the music arrived during the one window in your life when your brain was set to maximum absorption and your sense of yourself was still forming. The songs weren't better, you were younger, and the wiring was hotter, and so it took a permanent impression. Which means the movie Robot Jox, the album Nevermind, were never really competing on quality inside of my head. One of them showed up during the bump, the other one didn't. That alone tilts the whole scoreboard before a single note plays. And the bump is the first thing your brain is doing to you. The second thing is even sneakier. Let's go back to that movie theater, because there's a second illusion that's built into the golden 2-year run I described. I told you I threaded up Goodfellas, The Silence of the Lambs, and Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves in the same stretch. Lay those out in 1990 and 1991 look like a miracle. How do they make so many great films at once? They don't make them like that anymore. Except I was there in the booth for the whole slate. And I can tell you that for every Silence of the Lambs, I projected a dozen films that evaporated completely. Robot Jox wasn't the exception that year. Robot Jox was closer to the rule. I could name the others for you, except that's the whole point. I can't. They're gone from my head too. I projected them dozens of times, and today I couldn't tell you a single character's name. The forgetting was so complete that it took the memory of that forgetting along with it. The great films are the survivors of a much larger population of mediocre, forgettable, and outright bad movies that nobody is nostalgic for, because nobody remembers them at all. The era looks like a golden age because your memory threw away the evidence to the contrary and kept the highlight reel. That's survivorship. You're holding the curated best of a whole decade, and you've had 30 years to filter, up against the unfiltered flood of everything coming out this week, the masterpieces and the garbage all mixed together. And of course, this week looks worse. You're comparing a museum to a warehouse, and then concluding that the past had better taste. And we don't just do this for single weeks. We do this to whole decades, whole eras. We talk about the 90s or the 80s or the 70s as if each was one coherent thing with a consistent quality, when what we actually mean is the dozen or so things from that decade that survived long enough to become shorthand. The decade itself was the same overwhelming mess every decade is. We just finished editing it. But there's a deeper problem, and this is the one that should genuinely unsettle you. It isn't just that you forgot the bad stuff, it's that the good stuff you remember is not a recording, it's a reconstruction, and it changes every single time you play it. For most of the last century, scientists assume a memory once stored sat fixed in the brain like a file on a shelf. In 2000, a neuroscientist named Karim Nader ran an experiment that broke that assumption. He showed that when you retrieve a memory, you actually reactivate it. The memory becomes briefly unstable, chemically open, and your brain has to rebuild it, synthesizing fresh proteins just to hold on to it. He'd found that the act of remembering is also physically an act of rewriting. Recall and revision turned out to be the same effect in the brain, and the version that gets saved is shaped by whatever you know, feel, and believe at the moment you recall it. The neuroscientist Lisa Geneva has a clean way of putting it. Remembering something is like opening a document and hitting save again on the way out. Whatever edits crept in, the spacing, the lighting, the emotional grade, those get baked into the file. The previous version is overwritten. The next time you open it, you're reading the edit, not the original. And we're not talking about subtle drift. Elizabeth Loftus, one of the most important memory researchers alive, has spent decades demonstrating how easily entire false details get stitched into a memory, confidently, by people who would swear in court that they remember it perfectly. She's watched people develop vivid, detailed memories of events that never happened to them at all. I have a friend who tells wildly fantastic stories that include me, and I know for a fact his memories are wildly exaggerated. But I know that's how he remembers them, and so I just laugh along with him. Or maybe I'm just remembering a much more muted version of the same story, and his is the correct one. And the unsettling part isn't even the dramatic false memories. It's the small, constant, invisible editing that happens to all of us, to every ordinary good memory with no prompting at all. You don't need a manipulative interviewer. Recalling a memory fondly over and over on your own is enough to slowly improve it. Affection is its own kind of editing. Now put that together with the Reminiscence Bump. The memories you replay most often are exactly the ones from those formative years. The first concert, the perfect summer, the night you and your friends drove around with one specific album turned all the way up. Every time you've revisited those nights, you resaved a slightly cleaner cut. The friend who was actually a little annoying got smoothed out. The night that was kind of a little boring for long stretches got tightened into pure magic. You've been remastering these memories for 30 years, and your brain only keeps the remaster. So let me confess one of mine. There's a day from when I was 17 years old that I replayed in my head more times than I could count. One of the 2 perfect days of my life. It was a snow day from school, with the roads dry enough to still go out. We went to the store and picked up U2's Octung Baby that came out that day, and the 5 of us went to go see Cape Fear at the Cherry Creek Mall. The date was November 18th, 1991. In my memory, it's perfect. Probably one of the happiest days of my life. And the truth, which I can barely reach if I'm honest, is that the car was too cold. One of those friends and I were quietly annoyed with each other. And we were mostly just driving around because we had nowhere to go and we just had barely enough money for a movie. None of that survives the version I keep in my head. I've edited it, lovingly across 30 years, down to its best 90 seconds. And I wouldn't trade that edited version for an accurate one. That's the trap and the gift living in a single memory. And I didn't even notice it happening. So when new art shows up and you find it wanting, understand what it's actually up against. It's competing with the past. It's competing with a 30-year remaster of the past, color-corrected, rescored, and edited down to nothing but its best moments by an editor with a deep personal interest in making you feel good about your own youth. New art has to land in one raw, unedited take. The past gets unlimited reshoots and never has to show you the bloopers. That's not a fair fight, and your brain rigged it on purpose. Here's where the personal illusion turns into a societal one. Because we don't just believe our own youth was better, we believe the world itself has been sliding downhill ever since, and we're very sure about it. In 2019, 2 psychologists, John Protzko and Jonathan Schooler at the University of California, Santa Barbara, published a study in the Journal of Science Advances on what they named the Kids These Days effect. They surveyed around 3,500 American adults about whether young people today are worse than past generations on a few specific traits: respect for their elders, intelligence, enjoyment of reading. Across the board, the adults said yes, kids today are in decline. Then Protzko and Schooler found the tell. How much you believe kids have lost respect for authority depends almost entirely on how much you personally respect authority. The well-read are the ones convinced kids don't read anymore. The people who score high on intelligence are the ones most sure kids are getting dumber. The belief in decline isn't tracking the kids, it's tracking the person doing the judging. As someone who educates different generations of young adults, I can tell you that this is absolutely true what's going on. The mechanism is a memory trick. You take the person you are now, your current standards and habits, and you unconsciously project that backward onto your memory of yourself as a child. You misremember being more respectful, more literate, sharper than you actually were. And then today's kids, measured against that inflated memory, come up short. Protzko called it a memory tick. We've been doing it, he points out, for at least 2,600 years. There are surviving complaints about the worthless younger generation that are older than most of the world's religions. And we can prove the belief is false in at least one case cleanly. People are sure kids are getting less intelligent, but measured intelligence has risen, generation over generation, for most of the last century. It's well documented enough to have a name: the Flynn effect. The kids aren't scoring lower, they're scoring higher. The feeling of decline is so strong that it survives direct contact with the opposite evidence. Sit with that for a second. Here's a belief: kids are getting dumber. That's not only unsupported, but actively contradicted by the measurements. And it persists anyway, in smart, careful people, generation after generation. That's not an information problem. You can't fix it with a chart. It's built into the machinery, and the machinery doesn't care what the chart says. Now take that machinery, the one that makes you certain children are worse, and point it at culture. The music is garbage now. Movies are all sequels. Nobody writes real books anymore. That's the Kids These Days effect, wearing a different coat. It's the same memory tick, projecting your curated, remastered past onto a present you're seeing raw and complete. And if it makes you feel any better, you're in long company. Every new form has been accused in its moment of poisoning the young and cheapening the culture. The novel was going to rot women's minds. The waltz was obscene. Jazz was a moral emergency. Comic books were turning kids into delinquents, and there were actual Senate hearings about it. Rock and roll was a threat to the Republic. Television was the idiot box. Video games would breed a generation of violent illiterates. Every one of those panics felt to the people having it like sober observation rather than a reflex. Almost every one of them now reads as faintly ridiculous. The thing being panicked about usually turned out to be fine, and frequently turned out to be the next generation's classics. None of which proves that nothing ever actually declines. Things do get worse sometimes in specific and measurable ways. The point is narrower and more annoying than that. The feeling of general culture decline isn't evidence of cultural decline, because that exact feeling shows up reliably in every generation, including the ones we now call golden ages. The feeling is a constant. It can't be measuring something that changes. But I promised you this show takes the other side seriously, so let me make the strongest case I can against my own argument, because there may be something genuinely different about now, and it isn't about quality at all. In 1991, culture was shared. There were a small number of channels, a handful of radio formats, and a few magazines that mattered, and the whole country funneled through them. When The Silence of the Lambs came out, a huge slice of the population saw the same film. When Nevermind broke, you heard it whether you went looking for it or not. Think about what that used to look like. A new episode of a hit show, and the next morning, everyone at school or at work had seen the same thing the same night. One band breaking, and you couldn't avoid them. In cars, in stores, out of other people's windows. You didn't choose the monoculture. Greatness back then partly meant the thing everyone happened to be standing in front of at the same moment. Today, attention is shattered into a million feeds. The algorithms hand each of us a slightly different culture, tuned to keep us watching. Two people the same age in the same town may share almost no cultural reference points at all. And it's a fair question whether a movie or an album released now can ever achieve the same shared cultural footprint as one released into a world with 3 TV networks, simply because there's no longer a single room large enough for all of us to stand in at once. That's a real argument, but notice what it's actually about. It's about distribution, attention, and the architecture of how we encounter things. It's not an argument that the art is worse. It's an argument that the conditions for everyone agreeing on greatness have eroded. The next Nevermind might already exist. It just might never get the chance to be a thing 50 million people heard in the same year, which is a different loss, but not the one the nostalgia is selling us. And here's the fact that should keep all of us humble. The people holding Nevermind in 1991 had no idea. Nobody pointed at Pearl Jam's 10 and said, "This will still fill stadiums in 2025. The people living inside what we now call a golden age experienced as just the stuff that was out. They had no special foresight. They got the same single raw take we all get, which should make any of us very cautious about announcing, with confidence, that today's music or movies or books lack staying power. We are, every one of us, structurally incapable of knowing that from here. So far, the brain looks like a con artist. It inflates your youth, deletes the evidence, remasters your favorite nights, and convinces you the world is ending when it's most certainly just changing. If that were the whole story, you'd want to take your brain to court. But it's only half the story, and the other half is why I'd actually never want the con to stop. For most of history, nostalgia was considered a disease. The word was coined by a Swiss physician in the 1600s to describe a medical condition in soldiers, a kind of dangerous homesickness. Soldiers were sent home for it. Doctors debated whether it could kill you. The whole assumption was that looking backward with longing was a sickness, something gone wrong in a person. For 3 centuries, nostalgia was actually a disorder to be treated. Then, over the last 20 years, 2 researchers at the University of Southampton, Constantine Sedikides and Tim Wildschut, took nostalgia into the lab and found close to the opposite. Nostalgia, it turns out, is one of the more useful tools the mind has. In study after study, when they prompted people to get nostalgic, those people felt less lonely, more connected to others, higher in self-esteem, and more convinced that their lives had meaning and continuity. Nostalgia tends to get triggered precisely when you need it, in moments of loneliness or loss or uncertainty, and then it works as a buffer against exactly those feelings. One of their collaborators' papers has a title I love, Nostalgia, the Gift That Keeps on Giving. So the same reminiscence bump that distorts your music rankings is also the anchor that gives you a stable sense of who you are. The memories your brain remastered into something a little too golden are the same memories you reach for when you feel adrift, and reaching for them genuinely helps. The distortion and the comfort aren't 2 separate features. They're the same feature, seen from 2 sides. Sedikides and Wildschut have a term for the deepest version of this, self-continuity. The sense that the person you are today is genuinely continuous with the person you were at 17, and at 30, and last year. That thread isn't automatic. It has to be maintained, and nostalgia is one of the main tools the mind uses to maintain it. The song that puts me back into my old Chevy Beretta is also quietly reassuring me that I'm still me. Take that away entirely and you don't get a more rational person. You get a person who feels like a stranger to their own life. Let me make this concrete with the band I love right now. A few years ago, I fell hard for the band Ghost, and Ghost are, very deliberately, drawing on the sound and the staging of the arena rock and metal I grew up on, the 70s and 80s, the era of the big hook and the bigger show. So I have to be honest with myself about why I love them. Part of it is that they write genuinely great songs. And another part of it is that the sound keys directly into associations my brain laid down when I was a teenager, with the wiring at full heat, and I get to share my love of a newer band with my kids. I'm not embarrassed by that, I used to be. For a while I thought a sophisticated listener was supposed to love things on the pure merits, with no sentiment attached. I don't believe that anymore. But here's the gray, the part I keep coming back to. I can't separate those two things. I can't run an experiment that strips out my history and tells me how much I'd love Ghost if I were hearing those sounds with no past attached. Nobody can do that for any art, ever. The feeling a piece of music gives you doesn't come with an itemized receipt telling you how much was the craft and how much was your own 17-year-old self still in there responding. And maybe the deepest point of this whole episode is that the question might not even mean anything. A song that moves you because it's beautifully made, and a song that moves you because it's wired to your past both, in the end, move you. The moving is real either way. So yes, the brain is editing the past in your favor. It's also handing you something genuinely precious in return. A 3-minute song that can reopen an entire summer you'd otherwise have lost completely. You don't get to keep one without the other. The mechanism that lies to you is the mechanism that lets you go home. And going home, even to a home that's been quietly redecorated by your own memory, is not nothing. It might be one of the most important things the mind knows how to do. I want to end with my daughter, who's 16, which is to say she's sitting almost exactly on the front edge of her own reminiscence bump, whether she knows it or not. She loved the movie Project Hail Mary. When I first started sketching this episode, I was going to use her love of that film as an open question. Here's the thing my kid adores. Will it last? Could it possibly mean to her in 30 years what Goodfellas means to me now? We have no way of knowing. When the movie came out this past March, it made north of $650 million worldwide, one of the biggest films of the year. So it's not a small thing anymore, it's a genuine phenomenon. But, and this is the entire lesson of the episode in one sentence, that still doesn't answer my question. Box office in 2026 tells us nothing about meaning in 2055. Plenty of the biggest movies of any given year are completely forgotten within a decade. I've watched this happen in real time on a smaller scale my whole adult life. Films that owned a summer have vanished by the next one. Bands that were inescapable for 18 months are now merely a trivia question. Being huge isn't the same as lasting, and the year something comes out is exactly the moment that you have the least information about which one it's going to be. My daughter doesn't need me to tell her any of this, by the way. She's not ranking Project Hail Mary against the canon. She's 16 and she loves it fully, the way you can only love things before you've learned to be careful about loving them. That's the part I actually envy. The carefulness comes later, and the carefulness is mostly the problem. And there's a detail about Project Hail Mary I can't get past because it's almost too perfect for this episode. The film is about a man who wakes up alone, far from home, with no memory of who he is or why he's there. The whole story is him reconstructing his own past from fragments, trying to figure out what he's supposed to do, with his own faulty memory as the central obstacle. My daughter is falling in love with a story about the unreliability of memory, at the exact age when her memory is about to lock that very experience in for life. In 30 years, some piece of that movie, a line, a shot, the feeling of the theater she saw it in, might reopen her entire adolescence in about 3 seconds. And when it does, she won't be able to tell whether the movie endured because it was great or because she was 16 when she saw it. And here's the thing I want her to know. She'll be right not to be able to tell, because by then, it will honestly be both. Which brings me back up the ladder to the marquee with a pole in my hand and a box of black letters at my feet. I couldn't tell, standing up there, which of those cans held the films we'd still be talking about in 2025 and which ones held the ones we'd lose by Christmas. Nobody could. The movie about the giant fighting robots and the movie about Hannibal Lecter weighed the same in my hands. The thing that sorted them out was partly the work and partly luck and partly the slow machinery of millions of people remembering and forgetting. And inside each of those people, the same quiet theater employee I've been describing all episode, the one running the booth in the dark, deciding what to keep, polishing it a little brighter every time you visit, and never, not once, showing you the footage it threw away. Anyone who tells you the old stuff was simply better, full stop, or that today's stuff has no chance of lasting, has decided in advance which version of the past they're loyal to, and stopped asking what their own memory has been doing to them behind their back. Those are the questions we ask on Everything is Gray. Because nothing about this is simple. Your favorite song probably isn't your favorite for the reasons you think it is. And the next thing you'll still love in 30 years might be out right now. This week, sitting in the flood of all the junk. And the only reason you can't see it is that you weren't 17 when it arrived. This episode is dedicated to the movie Robot Jocks, and to every movie, every album, and every band we loved once and forgot we ever loved. The ones that didn't survive the edit, and that were, for one warm night in a dark room full of strangers, somebody's favorite thing in the world. I'm Lorne Bregitzer with Everything is Gray. Thanks for listening. This episode has been written, edited, and produced by Lorne Bregitzer.